Hello everybody and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope we're doing well, and today we're doing a box office preview for this weekend, which sees the film Twisters finally get released. This is a movie that's been very interesting in the box office tracking, as of course, with many movies from earlier in the summer not really doing all that well, thinking especially back to films like Furiosa, that movie being a massive and tremendous flop. We have since then had a couple of pretty big hits. We've had films, of course, like Inside Out 2. We now have Despicable Me 4, and we've had a few others as well. And so now the question ultimately is the box office back? Is Twisters going to be showing that there is indeed still life for a disaster film here in 2024 for this sequel to the 1996, I believe, was the year film, the original Twister itself? But also, what is the overall health of the actual box office? Obviously, we know that next week is going to be the release, finally, of Deadpool Wolverine, and there's a lot of hype surrounding that film. But will Twisters be able to bring some people out? Right now, the early indications are it might. It might bring out some people, but the big question, of course, is ultimately whether it's going to make its money back or not. And that also is a huge question because of how the budget is and how massive the budget is for this movie, being now reported as being between $155 and $200 million. That 155 number probably accounting for tax breaks, tax credits it got by filming in Oklahoma City, or at least in the surrounding area. Those, of course, are numbers that will be coming out and being updated, I imagine, over the course of the next few weeks. But we have some early numbers. We're going to talk about those. Also, we'll talk about where is the current state of Despicable Me 4. Is the film going to be able to possibly get upwards of $1 billion? As I have been saying, it looked like it was very likely that it had a very good chance of being able to do so as of a couple weeks ago, and I still hold to that. I think that there is still a likelihood for it to do so, especially since it has yet still to release in various markets internationally where it could bring in tens of millions of dollars more, which could also, again, push it over the edge just a little bit. We'll talk about that and plenty of other stuff. Before we get any further, though, please make sure you smash that like button, a lot of that fire button over on Odyssey, smash the rumble button as well. Also, make sure that you're subscribed to the channel. Make sure you hit that bell. That way you know and get a notification every time a new video or live stream goes live on the channel. So we'll start off today with Box Office Theory, which finally has their box office preview, their box office estimate for the weekend. And they are projecting the film to make around $69 million for the weekend. This is going to be the domestic opening for the film, opening at over 4,000 screens. Now, of course, earlier in their article, they do give a bit of a range, saying that he thinks, right, here talking, and I mentioned this before, Sean Robbins used to be for Box Office Pro. He started his own site, Box Office Theory, which has recently launched, and he usually does pretty good jobs with tracking and also especially in doing his charting as well. We also, of course, know we love charts here on OMB Reviews. And what I like especially is that he has the traditional industry tracking expectations. And so you see this, of course, being reported over at Deadline. I'm sure that this will get updated as we begin to get the preview numbers for this movie. In fact, we'll go ahead and see if they've actually updated their article, or if there is an updated article over on Deadline from Tony. Good old Tony. Let's see, $10 million in previews, so we actually do have an update. It looks like right now that they are projecting the film to still get $50+ million, but he thinks that it could rise upwards of $60 million because of the $10 million in previews. So again, 45+ million was what the traditional tracking, people like Tony, people like Deadline and Variety and all these other sites, this is the kind of methodology that they typically would use for this movie, whereas when it comes to Box Office Theory, he uses a very different type, right? He uses a bit of the traditional tracking, but then also accounts for things like social media presence, other aspects of pre-sales, things like that. And so for him, his actual tracking is saying it's going to be between $57 and $77 million. Now, because it had a $10 million Thursday premiere, that seems to indicate that it'll probably end up being in the range of Box Office Theory rather than being in the range initially estimated by the likes of Deadline and the mainstream media. So again, kudos to Box Office Theory. He's not always right, but when he is right, he is usually pretty darn good. And so again, the average of that number would be around $69, around $70 million domestic, which would be a pretty solid opening for this movie. Now, you can even see this in the early numbers being reported, and these updated numbers being reported here with Twisters, right? Saying here, and again, one thing to update here is that at $10.7 million is with previews from both Wednesday and Thursday, with the $7 million in preview money from both Wednesday night's IMAX and previews, which began at 5 p.m. Thursday. So it says this Beast of a Storm is at 10. Okay, gotcha. So the initial estimates then were $7 million, and it's been updated to $10.7 million. That's quite a bit off, I would say, percentage-wise. So again, regardless of that, $10 million, very, very good nonetheless. And so again, tracking a lot closer to the numbers being reported by Box Office Theory. We also have some other estimates as well. So Box Office Report, this is another site that tracks the box office, which I sometimes use, and it has its own projections saying they think the film will get around $64 million. Seems like they're going to be probably a little bit closer to the number that it actually is going to be versus that of the traditional model. And then, of course, Box Office Pro having the film's range of being between $60 and $75 million. So it looks like these other sites are probably going to be more accurate to the actual tracking of the box office versus that of the traditional method. But as we all know, typically the traditional method does end up being a bit more accurate as they start to plug in things like the Thursday premiere numbers, the Friday numbers, things like that. Normally, the numbers start to get a little bit more accurate as you get closer to Sunday, in which case the Sunday estimates that you finally get for the weekend usually end up being the most accurate of all, because there tends to not be much change, much difference when you start to see the Friday to Saturday numbers and the estimated Saturday to Sunday numbers. So looking pretty strong for this movie. But as I was going back to this article to talk about, right, even Variety is reporting the film to have cost $155 million. Even Tony at Deadline saying here that it cost $155 million, of course, is before you account for things like marketing. So this is likely taking into account the overall tax breaks, tax credits. As I had mentioned before, there's a report out of Oklahoma City from one of the trades there talking about how the actual budget was around $200 million. But even at $155, as far as net spend being projected right now for that movie, that's still a lot of money you need to make back. We live in a world now where that old 2.5 multiplier, right? 2.5 times your budget to break even is really not really accurate anymore, right? You now need to make closer to 3 times your budget. It really depends on where you're making your money. Are you making your money domestically? Are you making money internationally? How much presence do you have in China? All of these are going to impact that overall break-even point. And so that is still a lot of money that this film will ultimately need to make to break even, probably close to $400 to $500 million, in fact, if it hopes to break even. Now, based off of these numbers and based off of the overall tracking that Box Office Theory has been doing, one of the things that he does is also this long-term 5-week tracking, and he had estimated, based off of the numbers being reported here, that he suspected the film to possibly get upwards of $300 million domestic, right? Talking in that range that he has given for a lot of other films. If it gets to around $300 million domestic, then I think there's a very good chance for the film to at least get that in the international markets, which would put it around $600 million, which would, again, make the film make some money back. And also remember that because the film now has those tax credits being accounted for, at least it seems in part being accounted for, that means also that its break-even point is going to be a lot lower, right? 3 times that $200 million number would put it closer to $600 million as a break-even. Being at 155 actually brings it down almost $100 million as far as what it needs to break even, which means that this film, again, needs to make about $500 million or so to hit that number. And it's looking like it's going to be going to a pretty solid start, going to the upper end of the range that has been given by the likes of Box Office Theory, Box Office Pro. And because of that, we can suspect the long-term range domestically could possibly end up doing that. Now, of course, some will argue, well, there's going to be a lot of competition, especially next weekend, because the entire market's pretty much going to be gobbled up by Deadpool and Wolverine as far as the adult market, right? That PG-13 to R market. Obviously, we know it's going to be a rated R film. I still suspect that that movie is going to be one of the biggest rated R film openings of all time, one of the biggest box office total for a rated R film of all time, and I suspect that film will be able to make $1 billion. Speaking of $1 billion, I do still think that there's a chance for a film like Despicable Me 4 to get that number, because as you can see, it's still projected to be holding pretty well. Right now, we're a few weeks into its release, projected to only drop another 38%, so still holding well above the numbers of Inside Out 2. Now, obviously, they're separated by a few weeks, but still, it is holding very well. It's doing very similar numbers to what Inside Out 2 has done as far as its actual differences between week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4, right? As far as the percentage differences. So whereas it's not going to get to the $600 million or so that Inside Out 2 is very close to crossing domestically, we're talking here about the potential for $400 to $500 million domestic. that Despicable Me 4 likely will be able to get to. You add to that a very robust international presence, and you can see why I think that $1 billion is still on the table for this movie. Now, I think the film will either just miss out on $1 billion or just get over $1 billion. So we're not talking about a movie that's going to get upwards of that 1.5, 1.6 billion that right now Inside Out 2 seems to be tracking towards, but still, that $1 billion, a little bit more, a little bit less, definitely I think in its future, and the numbers seem to be playing out to that fact right now. Again, remember, still some international markets that have not been accounted for. That, of course, is going to ultimately lead to it having strong legs down the line in those international markets, in those international reports. And I think that by the end of this weekend, we'll start to see it continue to jump further and further along, and we'll start to see that narrative be a little bit more clear if I had to guess. It's at 2, continuing to do very well. Another 29% drop here being projected, $14.2 million. As I said, getting close to $600 million domestic. So this is going to be, if not the biggest movie of 2024, one of the biggest films. I still think there's a pretty good chance for a film like Deadpool and Wolverine, if the film especially is good, if it's able to motivate the average moviegoer that typically has not been going to see a lot of movies to finally go, especially that adult demographic that is oftentimes underserved, I think that you could end up seeing not just a huge opening weekend, but also very strong holds for a movie of this kind. Typically, when it comes to comic book movies, when it comes to these big budgeted films, you see massive drop-offs from week 1 to week 2. And the reason why is because you have a huge fan base that wants to see it right away, doesn't want anything spoiled for them, so they go to see the premieres, they go to see it opening weekend, but then that means you have that much more people not going to see it in its second weekend, so you have this massive drop-off percentage-wise. This is the kind of movie, and right now, with the last trailer just being released today, which was very effective, all of the other trailers have definitely, leaned into the comedy, have leaned into the raunchiness that the film is going to be. This final trailer was interesting because it was a very different tone. It was actually trying to show that there's going to be an element of seriousness to this movie too, which means that there's actual stakes, which means that there's actual characters to care about. And that's something that I think is going to be important to drive a lot of other people out to go see the film, right? If it's just going to be a rated R raunchy comedy, yeah, that's going to bring a lot of people out there. You add that element of seriousness to it, to stakes to it, I think that might be that final thing that pushes it over the edge in many different categories. And so, of course, we'll see whether that happens going into the weekend. Longlegs expected to hold around in the top 5 this weekend, dropping pretty starkly. And I had mentioned this, right, as a likelihood when it comes to films from Neon, when it comes to films from these more indie production companies, especially the more horror-oriented ones. Usually you have a much bigger than expected opening weekend. This one doing incredibly well in its opening weekend domestically, and then a pretty large drop-off the week after that, and so on and so forth. We're seeing that right now, 65% being projected for this film, especially with some mixed reviews coming from it. Quiet Place Day 1 still hanging around at 39%. This film has started to make profits, going to continue to add on to its overall profits. Going to Box Office Report for a second just to see what numbers they are projecting. So they're showing very similar numbers here, right? A 43% drop in its third week of release for Despicable Me 4, 32% drop for Inside Out 2, 45% drop. They actually suspect that Longlegs might actually hold a little bit better. So it'll be interesting to see whether Box Office Report or if Box Office Theory is correct in that regard. And then for them, rounding out the top 5 is going to be A Quiet Place Day 1. Now, something that I was predicting would likely happen based off of no one talking about the film, and the ones that were talking about it, giving it somewhat mixed reviews, was Fly Me to the Moon, right? This now, in its second week of release, is expected to drop 60%, according to Box Office Report. Over on Box Office Theories, they are suspecting around 58%, so very, very close there. This film cost $100 million to make. This is an Apple-Sony collaboration. Yeah, this film right now, I can say, based off of these projections, is likely to lose quite a bit of money. Let's go to the chart because we love charts here on OMB Reviews. So as I had mentioned before, right, the traditional break even for Twisters would have been around $387 million. Now that we live in a market where it's closer to 3 times the budget, it means that the break even for this movie is actually to be a little bit closer to around $500 million or so. With all of those things being taken into account and with the box office expected to be probably well north of $100 million. So going into the weekend before we actually had these Thursday numbers, they were already projecting globally the film to open over $100 million. We could probably suspect now that it'll be probably between $100 and $150 million globally. because of these updated numbers that have just come in from this past Thursday. And obviously we know that's now Wednesday and Thursday previews of around $10 million. So again, very impressive numbers there, much more than anyone would have suspected for a sequel to the 1996 film that no one was asking for. I think that's kind of what happens also when your marketing is pretty effective. It doesn't hurt to also have the director come out and say, yeah, by the way, this does not have any political nonsense in it. We have a movie about weather. There's obviously the speculation of, oh, it's going to deal with climate change. Nope. He says doesn't deal with that at all. It's just that's not my job to preach. It really shouldn't be the job of movies to try to preach and push political messaging because it isolates audiences. Hey, I think a lot more people are going to be much more likely to see the film because of that kind of attitude. But right now, as we can see from Twisters and the reporting being made on Twisters, the film still has quite a bit of work to do in order to make its money back. Let me see if I can update this to see if any of these numbers have updated since the recording of this video to give us our most accurate information possible. So Twisters, again, expected to do pretty well there. Long Legs is also a movie that is one that had a much better than expected opening weekend. It's also a film that has also started to make its money back. So again, congratulations to Neon for being able to do that based off of the budgets that we have in front of us and also how well it has been doing since its initial opening. Despicable Me 4. So right now, as you can see, the website is taking its sweet time in actually updating the information. So let me see if I can try to force this update. Might have to try to see if I can maybe refresh the page. Maybe that will make it work. We'll have to wait and see. That's why I like doing things live here on OMB Reviews. It keeps me honest and also sometimes can lead to some entertaining moments. And so with that not coming up there, I'm going to have to try to see if I can just do this the old-fashioned way by going directly to thenumbers.com. So as you can see, Fly Me to the Moon, right now the Thursday numbers are not looking that great, right? $600,000 for its Thursday. That would have been, again, from a week removed from its initial release. Let's see if we can get the full daily chart. As you can see, they're just being updated on thenumbers.com, so they do not have the most recent numbers there for the release of Twisters. Let's go ahead and pull a couple of these movies up so that way we can get an idea of how these films are doing, and we'll try to do Twisters if we can. So right now, Despicable Me 4 is being reported as being around $454 million domestic, based off of the numbers that we're seeing and the initial estimates for the weekend. And with the international numbers at play, I think we'll probably see this number get much closer to $600+ million by the end of this weekend. And again, traditionally, you would look at that number and say, all right, probably going to end between $800 and $900 million, if anything. Remember, again, this movie still has money that has not yet been reported in different countries, right? So we're now just finally getting updates. So it's so far made around $17 million in China. Now, as you all know, that is a bit of fool's gold because of how little they get back in the overall returns from that country. But we still, again, are waiting for some of these numbers to actually get a little bit closer. So we have some numbers coming out of Germany now. We've got some numbers also coming out of these later releases. So Japan, for instance, this actually gets released in Japan this weekend. So if we start to get numbers from Japan, suspect there to be tens of millions of dollars that will come overall from the Japanese audience when everything is said and done. So that's, again, a major market that is not yet open for this movie. It's also a market that is not yet open for Inside Out 2, which is why that film looking likely that it's going to get probably closer to that $1.6 billion number by the end of its run. Again, very, very impressive. The fact that it's going to get well over $600 million domestic by the end of its run. The fact that it even has a chance to get upwards of $1 billion alone just from the international market is also very impressive. Lots of net gain, net returns on that movie for Disney, and Lord knows they need it at this point in time. Long Legs right now at $32 million from its initial release. I don't know if they have the actual budget being reported here. It doesn't look like they do. Let's see if my chart has finally updated. Long Legs, as you can see, it finally has updated with that $30.6 million. $1.8 million is the actual gain. So if the film even has that higher 60+% drop off in its second weekend, it's still just making raw profits at this point. So we're probably looking at between $10 and $30 million in net profits for Neon. So again, congratulations to them for having a film be able to do as well as it is currently doing. I would love to give updates on some of the other films, but as you can see, right now, none of them are really loading up at this point in time. But what I can say based on the numbers that I do know, Despicable Me 4 is adding to its overall profits. Inside Out 2 making massive gains, massive profits. And based off of the numbers and the projections that we're seeing for Twisters, might have a chance of being a pretty big success. Do you think that Twisters is going to make its money back, make a little bit of profit? Do you think it's going to be maybe a surprise hit of the summer? By hit, we mean, of course, not just that it's making a lot of money, but that also might be one of the biggest money makers of the summer. Not that that's a massively high bar at this point based on what has been released, but when we're talking about possibilities of $300 million domestic, yeah, that's nothing to look over, right? Especially at the current state of the box office, the current state of where things are. For the record, I don't think the box office is back. I don't think the box office has recovered. I think in the case of films like Twisters, this is a very unique movie. It's a unique experience, right? It's not something that is going to be guaranteed. You look at a film like Fly Me to the Moon, massive financial loss for Apple, for Sony, based just on the theatrical numbers there. Twisters, looking like it's going to make some money back for Universal. Despicable Me 4, Inside Out 2. These, of course, are going to be some of the massive films to come out this year. Quiet Place Day 1, doing very, very well. Long Legs, surprising. Bad Boys Ride or Die, doing well, but not nearly as well as some would have suspected it would. Horizon, a massive flop. Sound of Hope, doing okay. So right now, the box office is still very much all over the place. We just need to go back even to early in the summer, as I'd mentioned earlier in this video, about talking about what happened to Furiosa, right? We're talking about a movie that lost hundreds of millions of dollars. Right, let's see if those numbers are actually updated as of this point in time. It still looks like they are not. This is what happens sometimes when you do things live and you rely on data and information to be updated and uploaded in real time. But the point and the fact still remains, we live in a very, very, very volatile time when it comes to box office numbers. And though we do indeed anticipate a massive win for Disney, for Marvel, for Ryan Reynolds next week with Deadpool and Wolverine, the real question is, will that actually carry and hold over into the fall, into the winter, and into the next year? Right now, it seems like the box office might actually overall still be a little bit down. Yeah, you have massive wins, and shout out to Culture Casino because he's actually made estimates that he still thinks it's going to be over 10% under where it was last year. And I think that there's definitely a reason to suspect that we're going to see something like that happen because, yeah, you have these massive wins in a Deadpool and Wolverine, potentially, right? In The Inside Out, in Despicable Me 4. You also still, though, have those massive losses as well with Furiosa and also not a lot of prospects beyond those movies. So what are y'all's thoughts about that? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below, and hopefully these numbers will update by the time we get to our box office breakdown on Sunday. But let me know your thoughts, and it really does. I really do appreciate that if you can share this video out as well, so that way people can find it, can get educated on the subject. And if you care about box office numbers, let me know your thoughts on that also in the comments below. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Have a wonderful rest of your day, a blessed Friday, and as always, God bless. And now for a huge special shout out to all of my Patreon, Subscribe Star, Locals, and YouTube members who are at the Chosen of Valhalla level. Starting off with my Patreon supporters, Father Luca Illick, Rosetta Allen, check out her YouTube channel, which is Eagle Rider, and Miss Martin Muses, check out her YouTube channel by the same name. To my Subscribe Star Chosen members, Matt317, check out his Twitch channel by the same name, and also the K-Man, check him out at xtheboundaries.co, and a shout out also to my one Chosen of Valhalla YouTube member, Mr. Roy. Thank you again for being so much of a huge supporter of the channel. And to every one of my Chosen members, if you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and video, or if you want access to things like giveaways of Blu-rays, 4Ks, etc., and access to an exclusive podcast bonus material for members, check out the links in the video description below for all of those details. You guys are amazing and beautiful people. Have a wonderful rest of your day, a blessed month of the Sacred Heart, and as always, God bless.